lately that I've been thinking about how actually bizarre it is that my father has killed my mother several times and my sister once. I sincerely don't want to, because I'm scared that I'm going to reveal something that is better to be kept like this.
Dario Argento was born in Rome, Italy, on September 7, 1940. The son of producer Salvatore Argento, he began his career as a movie critic for the Rome daily newspaper Paese Sera, and leveraged that job into a gig writing screenplays, most famously co-authoring Sergio Leone's epic western Once Upon a Time in the West in 1967. He made his directorial debut in 1970 with The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, the first of his animal trilogy. Plumage was a loose adaptation of the book The Screaming Mimi, which was adapted into a 1958 film of the same name in the United States. Produced by his father Salvatore, who would produce all of his films until Profondo Rosso, Bird is credited with popularizing the Giallo movement, named for the yellow cover of the pulp crime thrillers the films were based on, although the movement started much earlier. 1971's The Cat o' Nine Tails followed, and though he calls it one of his least favorite of his films, it was quite successful, and by the time his animal trilogy wrapped up later that same year with Four Flies on Grey Velvet, he was able to secure more funding for his films and work with a higher caliber of actor. Dissatisfied with the giallo genre, Argento experimented with historical comedy in 1973's The 5 Days, which was a dismal failure and caused him to reevaluate his tough stance on the giallo style. It was during the making of 1975's Profondo Rosso, or Deep Red, that he met Daria Nicolodi, who would be his partner and collaborator on several films and bear him a daughter named Asia. Deep Red catapulted him to greater acclaim, and his follow-up, 1977's Suspiria, was the first part of his Three Mothers trilogy, and is his highest regarded film critically. 1980's Inferno followed, and while he wouldn't complete his trilogy for decades, it at least helped him hone his skills and epitomized his tendency for his films to have a surreal, dreamlike quality. Lashing out at his critics with 1982's Tenebrae, he splattered the scene with gore in a movie that was pure giallo, and still got across his disgust for critics and censors, who he would again ridicule in a later film. First, though, was 1985's Phenomena, starring a pre-Labyrinth Jennifer Connelly. Phenomena is cited as Argento's favorite film, his most autobiographical film to date, and also his most bitter. 1987's Opera was his last collaboration with his eventual ex-wife Dario Nicolodi for almost 20 years. He didn't direct another film for a while, but in 1990 collaborated with longtime friend and colleague George Romero, who received substantial inspiration and material assistance from Argento. The film, The Two Evil Eyes, was a double feature of Poe stories, Poe being an author very dear to Argento and a significant inspiration for him. Material assistance went both ways, and Argento borrowed longtime Romero horror wizard Tom Savini for 1993's Trauma, easily his most exciting film from the latter half of his career. Collaborations with daughter Asia, such as in 1996's The Stendhal Syndrome, became increasingly common, and she received top billing in 1998's adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera. 2001's Sleepless was a return to giallo style with a more mature mindset. While it didn't set the world on fire critically or at the box office, it signaled a return to his giallo roots, and he proved he wasn't ready to get up with 2004's The Card Player. 2007's The Mother of Tears closed the loop on the Three Mothers trilogy and was a nice lead-in to 2009's Giallo, another whodunit about a killer with the name Yellow, a playful ode to the film style that had become synonymous with his name. Though he hasn't officially made anything since 2012's Dracula 3D, there are tentative plans for an Iggy Pop collab called The Sandman, so it's possible we haven't seen the last of this enigmatic and prolific filmmaker. Keep your eyes peeled for his next effort, or he'll help you keep them open.
Italian-born Dario Argento. Nightmarish is definitely a term that I would use to describe some of his films. Not so much horror or horrific or terrifying, but nightmarish for sure, something that you can't escape. But my name's Jon Dunning, and this is Director's Cut. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jason Alt.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Joining us tonight, our special guest is, a lot of people know him as Rhystic Studies, but tonight, Sam Gallio, thank you so much for joining us.
Buongiorno, buonasera. Hi, I'm a doctorate student of Italian literature, Italian studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm happy to talk with these guys. I know them through the world of magic, but tonight we're talking film, and of course, it's hard to escape studying any sort of Italian cinema, like post-war cinema in Italy, without talking about Argento's films. So I'm excited. I studied a bunch of his earlier stuff in a doctoral course with Dr. Paolo Bonifacio at UT Austin. And I'm hoping to share some of the stuff we talked about today. But I understand that this podcast is mostly about just chatting movies for the love of film. So, yeah, I'm happy to join you guys. Stoked.
Absolutely. This is, you said through the world of magic, but Argento's films are pretty much that. I mean, they are very much, if you look back to his influences of Edgar Allan Poe and Walt Disney, namely Snow White, there is quite a bit of magic involved in Argento films.
Billy John puns. It's early in the episode for that, man.
Yep.
And I'm not even drinking tonight.
Hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Well,
one time zone east of me, wherever that is.
You're doing this, right, Jason? Who's your special guest?
My special guest is Michigan Shorts Brewery. They did a special batch 10,000, and it is a double brute India Pale Ale with mango and blackcurrant, and it is fantastic. And I probably will never be able to get another bottle of it. So,
Yum.
Special occasion for our special guest who knows as much about Argento as I wish I did.
Before we kind of jump into like his films and talking about his style and just the man himself, Sam, can you tell us a little bit about the history of what a giallo is?
Yeah, giallo is at the beginning of the 20th century. Often you talk about giallo, you're talking about mystery stories like detective novels, thriller novels. They're all very predictable plots. The point is, it just had a wide readership because of the movement, but also it was a highly translated sort of literary genre as well. So a lot of these stories were coming outside of Italy and into Italy through translation, and it's named after the color of the book. The book covers were all yellow, so that was like a signifier that this book fit that genre.
Sort of like the way we call it pulp.
Yeah, like a pulp. And their giallo went from being a literary term to applying it to a genre that could work inside of film or inside of comic books or whatever. So some of Argento's movies, not all of them can relate to that genre pretty well, because he leans into the mystery novel type tropes for his plots. So that's sort of where he intersects with literature. But the giallo is, I mean, we've had similar traditions here in the States, but that was at the beginning of the 20th century in Italy. And again, it was mostly a lot of translated work. There weren't many like Italian giallists, if you will. So.
Kind of a common theme too. It's kind of like the black gloved killer, kind of the stalker. I guess they would be the closest thing reminiscent to an American audience would be what the slasher film became, where like a Scream or something is very kind of Americanized giallo in my opinion. But it was also his blending of that kind of genre with mixing of supernatural elements, which he later would do, which I think those two things together, that's where you got your storybook feels. And it's all, like I said at the top of the episode, it's all very dreamlike. Even some of his more grounded films like opera, if you could say an Argento film is grounded at all like opera or Phenomena, they take on, they're very grounded in the sense of fantastical things happening in a real world setting.
Even when he chose to adapt something, he would pick something that sort of fit with that style. Something he read that he's like, oh, this is nice and nightmarish. I like the tone of that. So like he adapted the Screaming Mimes for his first movie, but even that he sort of made it kind of dreamlike. And I think there's a quote from him where he says, I'm Dario Argento. My style is something that recognizable, I think, by the audience. And he's right about that. And he's very aware that he's got a tone he likes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was much more, he was more fueled by this every single scene selection, the lighting, whether it be blown out, you know, the big reds, the big blues, or just placement. You know, his mise en scène is always placed in a way where there's a lot of misdirection. The greatest example of that is the scene in Profondo Rosso, or Deep Red, when you're looking at kind of the parlor room, and then out of nowhere, out of left field, basically the doll comes and attacks. He had a lot more. That's what really fueled him is the editing and the shot selection, more so than the performances from his actors and actresses.
Yeah, he really doesn't respect actors that much. So much so that he said he didn't want his daughter to become an actor, and then now he likes working with her. I think that's pretty funny. My daughter Asia has been in many movies. I love working with her. In the beginning, I was not supportive of her being an actress, but now I think she's fantastic. I just think that's kind of funny. He's like, no, acting is not a noble profession. Pick anything else. I don't respect actors. I kill them off camera.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, especially his the people that are closest to him. You know, he had a very long marriage with Daria. Oh God, I'm blanking the last name now. It's not Argento, but yeah,
it was.
Well, yeah, it was.
Let's say Dario Argento, whatever.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, you could tell by the progression of the films, her deaths just got more and more gruesome. Where she would actually survive a lot of these films, but then towards the end, yeah, in Opera, her grand send off of a bullet through the eye. And yes, we're gonna, you know, fortunately, we're gonna talk about some spoilers, unlike our last filmmaker, because you know, Lanthimos, his films were so current. I think all of his films were in the 2000s. We're talking about films that were made in the 1970s, 1980s. So, you know, absolutely, you should go watch all the Dario Argento films. But if you haven't and you want to avoid spoilers, maybe go, you know, put us on pause for a second, then go hit up Amazon Prime, because blessedly,
the really good ones are on Prime.
Yeah, which is, oh man, that was
if
fantastic.
you see one, probably see either Deep Red or Suspiria, for sure. Just any movie where he delighted in torturing Dario Nicolodi.
That's it.
That's one. Yeah, I agree with Jason. Those are the top two, I'd say, to like make your way into Argento's world, especially Suspiria. I made my friend sit through Suspiria last Halloween just because it's so much fun. I think it's just absolutely, like, at its core, just a very fun movie, visually speaking, and also the plot and whatnot. But also because, like, Guadagnino remade Suspiria, so you have like a segue into more of the recent horror, like art house horror stuff that's going on now, and you can kind of compare and contrast. So those are the two. And Suspiria is like 90 minutes long. It's just so digestible and quick. So,
and Trauma is probably my favorite of his later films. Everything did like after the midpoint of his career. I think Trauma is my personal favorite, but I'm like a big Tom Savini fan.
That's Tom Savini at his finest. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Suspiria is just a work of visual art. It's not, you don't watch that film or even Inferno, and he's broken these films down into trilogies. Some of them, he has the Animal trilogy, and then he has the Three Mothers trilogy, which he started off strong with Suspiria. A lot of people, I really enjoyed Inferno. A lot of people didn't like it as much, and then finished it off with the Three Mother of Tears, which skip. Yeah, don't watch that. That was bad. But yeah, Suspiria, like, especially the first 15. You said that you made your friend sit through it, but I mean, if you're not hooked after the first 15 minutes, that is the most between the score, the visual effects, and just the acting and everything. It's such a spectacle, Suspiria, the first 15 minutes of it. I mean, that would make a Dario Argento fan from the toughest critics, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to approach if you're really used to like very mainstream current Hollywood films, because it does have an element of like homemade feel, especially because it was dubbed. Like he chose to work in English, even though he was Italian, and making films in Italy, and sometimes with Italian actors and actresses, because like he wanted to be marketable to a bigger scene, of course, outside of Europe. So if you watch like Suspiria, it's English actors, but they go in and dub because like the tech wasn't strong, or he didn't have enough of a budget to like have microphones on set or whatever have you. Like, we've gone on lots of discussions about the utility of dubbing and what dubbing is and how it works. And, you know, in the 60s and 70s, with all these Italian directors, even outside of horror films, making spaghetti westerns or making like, there was a huge boost of like cop kind of movies in Italy in the 70s, like just tons of really crappy homemade type movies. But dubbing was fundamental to them having the ability to make films, because they could just go shoot, on scene or on set for a while, and then go over into the studio and actually record all the lines. But as a result, like, it's never very synchronized. It's always kind of choppy and kind of janky. But to me, that gives it character. It's hard for me to like have my friends kind of buy into that, because it's a bit jarring if you're not used to that style. So I'd say that's the only point of contention in terms of like if you're used to really well-made films from that perspective. But those are forgivable things because of the stylization. It's just so stylized in a way that you don't see very often anymore, even outside of horror, in big budget movies. So
if you watch any kung fu movies from that era too, I guess you're kind of used to that.
Yeah,
the dubbing, because it doesn't matter what language it was, the overdub is in, it just sounds off. Even something like terrible that like Hercules in New York that they dubbed just because Schwarzenegger was impossible to understand. It's got that quality to it, and I kind of find that charming. Yeah, because I like movies from that era. So like, yeah, it's gonna be kind of, if you've never seen anything like that, you're sort of like, oh, the hell. But I think once you get into it, it's got a charming quality to it.
Yeah, it really does. I agree.
Argento films are like, some of them feel like they're dubbed correctly, and then until they're not.
That the Tam Academy was founded in 1895 by a certain Helena Marcos, a Greek immigrant, and that the local people believed her to be a witch. I guess you knew that.
No, but I have a strange feeling that somebody already told me about it.
Like especially some of the later ones, like Phenomena is like, I think some scenes they must have filmed with sound, because it full on sounds like Jennifer Connelly and from her, and it sounds like, whatever is going on around her. But then some of them, it'll cut to anyone else in the car, Dario Nicoletti, and then it's like the ADR is very prevalent. So I think that is quite a barrier of entry. I'd have to agree with you, Sam, where it does seem a little funky, and sometimes it does take you out of it, because it's even like the Italian actors, because I watched like I think Cat o' Nine Tails with subtitles, because I wanted that kind of juxtaposition of watching one of these films dubbed and watching it with subs. And the actors are still, even the Italian born actors are still look like they're trying to speak English, and then they overdub. They don't like, these are all Italian actors, most of them. And then when they come back to film the voiceover, it's still them. They're not getting an American actor to play this. So it's still the same actors it's coming from. So it is a little funky sometimes, but sometimes it works just fine.
Realistically, Sam, can you go a little bit into critically? He was slammed a lot for people outside of Italy for what were perceived as sexist thematics to his films, and there's some Italian culture in there. There's some Asia speculating that her grandmother must have messed Dario up a little bit, or just sort of, he like refuses to get therapy too. He's like, the psychiatrists examine you and ask about your life and work, and then they can decide whether your film can be shown or not. It's a horrible experience. Like, he didn't want to get psychoanalyzed just because he didn't want that to reflect poorly on any of his work. So, who knows, maybe his mom messed him up. Maybe he was a sexist, or maybe that was a little bit of Italian culture. So given that criticism, which is something you've surely encountered in your studying, especially of his earlier work, can you address that a little bit?
There's this quote that's always attributed to him in these like think pieces on his work because of the misogynistic elements in his films, which is like, I like women, especially beautiful ones. If they have a good face and figure, I would much prefer to watch them being murdered than an ugly girl or man. So this was like, this was stated in the face of criticism, when he started gaining popularity and whatnot. What I looked at in this course specifically was the mix of gender and genre. It was kind of a play on word, because in Italian, it's the same word. You use the same word for gender and genre. So we were looking at all these films from the perspective of like, how do gender roles, how does gender performed, because it's film, it's a performance, how is it performed in films within the context of the genre that it's working in? So we looked at horror films, we look at spaghetti westerns and like masculinity. We look at again the police thrillers and like the obsession with the femme fatale and whatnot. In horror, like especially in Argento stuff, it's not as black and white as like maybe people have grown to call him, like just label him as a misogynist or label him as whatever. Like it's pretty complex, especially in the earlier work when folks were kind of on his tail about being a misogynist. I guess like in general, if you think about slasher films, even from the 90s and 2000s in the States, like the slasher film is kind of obsessed with like the male gaze in terms of like most of the victims in slasher films are always these young hot women, and there's like this weird sadomasochistic element of them being murdered, but in a very sexy way or in a sexual setting. So and typically like in the monster films, I'm thinking of like Friday the 13th and like Nightmare on Elm Street, there is an element of like, I don't know, abusive sexual abuse that comes across. In Argento though, it's really convoluted because a lot of his earlier work, specifically in like Cat of Nine Tails and Profondo Rosso, you have killers who are female, right? And it's a bit of a trick. Like a lot of the plot revolves around the red herring that the killer is a male, and so he sells you thinking that it's one of the men in the story. But usually the case is that like the prime suspect is then murdered by the woman who is the actual killer. And then it kind of comes full circle and it's like, well, the killer is a woman who was sexually abused as a child or has a really tenuous relationship with their parents because they saw something they shouldn't have, or was abused, not sexually, but just physically by their parents. So it's really not that simple with Argento. It's not just a matter of like, if you think back to like Jason Voorhees or even Scream, you know, that was just like playing on the horror genre of weird monster killing hot girls for the sake of spectacle. It's like there's a lot more, and of course you can get into like the Freudian readings of Argento. There's a lot more family history that has to do with it, and as a result, you get killers that are female, and you also get victims that are male and aren't just like the good looking attractive ones. So it's really funky. I really don't know how to. It's really hard to talk about Argento without talking about the misogyny that comes across, but it's also like, I don't want to defend him because it is problematic and complex. So I don't know. There's a lot there to unpack, but basically in this class we looked at just the role of the female in a lot of these characters and a lot of these stories. So yeah, he's problematic, and of course there's the elements of the hot girl getting murdered, like the beginning of Suspiria is sort of that gore fest that you would expect from a slasher genre movie, but yeah, there's more to it than that.
In Suspiria, you know, conversely, the main antagonist is a woman or is a group of women. Tenenbaum, I think, you know, he listened to a lot of this criticism, and I think it really ate out of him because he was doing genre films, but he was making powerful female characters in these roles. And when he made Tenenbaum, he made a parody, kind of a thumb to the nose at the critics and at the audiences, I think, accusing him of misogyny, where he's just like, you know, a lot of other filmmakers being accused of something like this would kind of go, you know, shy away from it. And he looked at right dead on. He's just like, okay, I'm going to kill like 5 attractive women. But then, like you said, then he goes and he kills the makeshift killer in it with the axe to the head, who's this like pathetic male character. So it's like he starts off as he's like, I'm going to make the most misogynistic giallo of all time. And then by the end of it, he spins it around. This is not what's going on. This is not what I'm about. And like you said, I don't want to defend him because I don't know. I mean, there has to be something. And this is a good question for Sam. Do you think in all the films, especially the slasher films, when it's just showing the black glove hands doing the slashing, doing the killing, that's all Argento's hands. That's not an actor. So do you think that that's kind of his way of, do you think it's a trust thing that he doesn't want to trust that to another actor, that he wants to be, I guess, so to speak, hands-on? Or do you think that's kind of exercising some demons as well?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, why write these films in the first place? Why make them? Like, what kind of person wants to make horror films, you know? And why do we enjoy watching them? You know, what's the role in the spectator? Like, that's kind of tough to answer too, because it's fun, but it's also there is the element of voyeurism that comes across, especially with these first person shots. You know, like a lot of Profondo Rosso is explicitly placing you in the role of the killer, you know, from their perspective. So I think he wants to play with that. I think he really wants. I think like the horror genre in general is a function of some sort of catharsis or some sort of like voyeurism. I keep coming back to because it feels like that, you know. How do we claim to enjoy these films knowing they're very problematic and violent and like oppressive, but still have fun with them, you know? I think
he thinks horror's honest.
Yeah.
It's not just cathartic. And he thinks horror's honest. He said horror's the future and you cannot be afraid. You must push everything to the absolute limit or else life will be boring. People will be boring. Horror is like a serpent. It's always shedding its skin, always changing, and it will always come back. It can't be hidden away like the guilty secrets we try to keep in our subconscious. And I read that quote. I'm like, no wonder this guy likes Poe so much, you know? Because Poe is all about like, you can't really get away with anything, you know? So I kind of think that he kind of picked on women because I think it's more upsetting to see a beautiful woman killed. And like, if that's sexist, then we're all sexist. I think he really does that. And I think he at least played around with the tropes a little bit more than American horror did in like the 80s and 90s, where it was always the hot girl getting killed by a like weird dude. He at least played around with it a little bit. So the fact that like he was called sexist more than some of the, I would say, lazier directors of the 80s and 90s in America, I think is a little bit silly. And I think he was a little bit progressive. I mean, you know, he's European, so compared to the Americans of the time, he's definitely a little bit more progressive. He said, I'm very interested in portraying homosexual men and women in my films because I'm interested in their lives and their problems. Not because he wanted a big, goofy stereotype to fit something. It was never like explicit. Like Jean-Pierre Mariel said he wanted to be gay in Four Flies on Grey Velvet. It wasn't written that way. And he was just like, whatever, put it in the movie. It doesn't matter. And I think that's pretty progressive for 1971. I think he was just sort of like, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be a major plot point that the character's gay because it's not going to serve the plot. So he's not going to be a big goofy stereotype. Like every gay person on television was in like the late 90s and early 2000s, you know?
Yeah.
He had better gay characters than Will and Grace, for Christ's sake, like 30 years earlier.
Ooh, I'm vibrating. Which means I have a text message on my vibrator.
True. There's a handful of think pieces and articles I've read about the use of like the grotesque and the other, you know, be it transvestite, transgender, or homosexual, whatever have you. Like there is an element in horror films of the grotesque. There's always like a disability or a deformity that kind of is leveraged.
Dragon and Buffalo Bill and
Yeah, exactly. That's also part of horror tropes, but Argento handles those in a way that is very like matter of fact, and like you were saying, there's not a lot of judgment or punishment through it. You can see little subtleties in that all over the place. A fun interpretation of Bird with Crystal Plumage comes from like using the energy of the women's movement that happened in the 60s, late 60s in Italy, like 1968 specifically, where feminism became mainstream. Well, not mainstream, but like I guess put on the radar. There was a lot of protests and a lot of gathering around women's rights. 1970 is when divorce is legalized for the first time, and a referendum in 1974 kept divorce. Like they sent it back, like, and asked the question through a referendum, which is yes or no. Like, should we keep divorce legal in Italy? And everyone said yes, except the Catholic Church. So,
well, yeah,
yeah,
that's the most Catholic country on the planet.
Yeah. Exactly. And so he was trying to capture, I think he was capturing a lot of the energy in that. Bird with Crystal Plumage is very much trying to tap into that young people's, progressive attitudes. And to echo what you said, homosexuality is always presented as just a matter of fact. And in the 70s, in a country that's barely accepting divorce for the first time, this could really only happen in the North. In the South, that would be punished, and in many ways, just in the family and whatnot, but also legally punished. Yeah, it's cool. He's very progressive in that way, without a doubt. I couldn't agree more, especially with the Will and Grace point. Like, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look back at the people that are woke now, they're going to seem regressive in 30 years, and that's just the inevitability of progress. I'm not defending anybody who's like less than perfect now. I think we should always try to be better, but to have your attitude captured on celluloid forever and kept forever. If you're progressive for 1971, you're regressive for 2011. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, I think I don't think it is worth the mental energy to go like, can you believe what Charles Bronson said in a Playboy article in 1958? It's like, yeah, probably. Is Charles Bronson canceled? No, like, I don't want to defend him too much because, like, there's a lot going on. Even his daughter's like, my dad's a little bit weird in what she delights in killing women in these movies.
Yeah.
But I don't think I don't think we help ourselves out too much by like saying, oh, Argento is canceled. Because, you know, but especially because the more you delve into it, the more you see there's a little bit more complexity to it. And it's funny because his take on The Bird with Crystal Plumage, which was a 1950s book called The Screaming Mimes that was made into a movie in 1958. His interpretation, as much as it was called sexist, it's funny because it's a lot more progressive than the 1958 American film, The Screaming Mimes. If you go back and read a plot summary of that, you know, compared to The Bird with Crystal Plumage, he had a much more progressive take a mere decade later.
Yeah.
Even his daughter stated, you know, he killed my mother in so many different ways. And then when he couldn't anymore, that's when he shifted his gaze to me. I feel like I've been put on this earth just to be my father's muse. And she was even uncomfortable in, I think it was Trauma, where she had to do a topless scene. She said that was one of the hardest things that she ever had to do as an actress, to do a topless scene with her father directing, but he was very adamant about, you know, the context of the scene. So yeah, it's like when your own,
just have your DP shoot it. Like, why do you need to be in the room?
Why is it gotta be dad? Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is a family affair, and I think that goes more, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but that's more of an Italian kind of mindset. He is very Italian. He's very proud to be an Italian. He, you know, he didn't make the jump over to the U.S. like a lot of filmmakers, international filmmakers did. Even his own brother, executive producer on most of his and co-writer on most of his films, even at one point was just like, Dario, we got to move over to the US. That's kind of the next thing. He's like, no, I'm going to make Italian films, and, you know, I'm going to make Italian films for Americans too, because he was aware of that market. And I don't want to say he was pandering to a certain market, but he definitely was trying to make films that were enjoyed by multicultures. It was just a family business, so to speak. So whether it was his wife or his daughter or his brother, I think his father was involved up until the point of his death. It just feels like a very traditional family business, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we're attracted to like working with his material and other directors because they are auteurs in their own way. They have a vision and they really stick to it headstrongly, especially if it's problematic. I think that's why we end up talking about these kinds of guys. I think Paul Thomas Anderson fits that bill. I know you guys have talked about him quite a few times, but I mean, he has a vision and he has a story to tell, and he has a voice, and he has tendencies and signature elements and styles. And, you know, for the most part, the more film becomes commercialized, the less those elements can have room to shine. You know, you don't have a lot of room when the bottom line is like selling tickets. So so you have to admire him for that, and it also makes the material much richer because his hands are all over it. You know, he's like none of his films could ever escape censorship. At least 5 to 10 minutes of all of his films were always cut. So he was always looking to push the boundaries and see how much he could get away with. Which is important, you know, like, what is the taboo? What can I not show? What am I not allowed to say? And I think that is just as revealing as the things that you are allowed to say and show. So especially for scholars who want to look at this material as like, you know, an embodiment or a capturing of the cultural milieu or whatever. So yeah, I think that's why we end up talking about his films, because he's just a quote unquote auteur in his own way.
Yeah, when he goes like internationally, whatever, it's these younger people, you know, in their late teens or 20s or 30s that are going to go to Argento signings and whatnot. It's his films really speak and they really translate well to a younger generation of artists. Let's talk a little bit. Let's kind of shift focus more of him as a technical filmmaker. Talking about just his shots, his color usage of oversaturation, everything feels so dreamlike. His influences of storybooks and grim fairy tales, namely, and he even stated mostly like Disney movies. He said like seeing Snow White was life changing for him, seeing in the theater, and you could get a lot of that out of Suspiria or even Profondo Rosso, where everything feels like you're kind of traveling through a haunted house, and it's very very dreamlike, where it's not the most linear of films. His films are not very linear. You're not going there for a plot. Like I would argue the new, I watched the 2018 version of Suspiria, and I feel like that's a lot more streamlined of a film. They actually make the dancing matter, and they even flesh out the story of the three mothers a little bit better than they do in the original Suspiria. Do I like the original better? Of course. But it's not, you're not really going for the story. You're going for an experience. Even I think Opera is definitely one of his most dreamlike and nightmarish films, because even the way that Christina Meirelish's character is responding to some of these, and it kind of gets, kind of gets revealed why she's responding the way she does, where she's all these horrific things are happening. She's being forced to watch these horrific things. And then right after the scene happens, when he lets her go, she kind of forgets it and acts normal. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on? And it kind of, fleshes itself out by the end of it and explains why. But that feels like a very nightmare-esque, like one that you can't escape from. Like you wake up during a nightmare and you go right back into it. And he does that so well, where everything is very like lucid. Everything feels like a lucid dream that you can't escape.
There's a director called Mario Bava who was making films along the same genre. The film that we analyzed in conjunction with Suspiria and Deep Red is called Sei donne per l'assassino. In English, it's Blood and Black Lace. And if you want to talk about like super saturated set pieces, just look up screenshots from this film called Blood and Black Lace. It's over the top, it's over the top. And I think that ties into Argento's approach and his desire to make horror films, which is just to like ultimately have fun and make something very artistic. Like Argento's blood it doesn't look like blood, it's very red and thick and gooey, and I think that playful element really helps remind the audience that these are pieces of art.
Mm-hmm.
Art itself,
his blood and gore is almost metaphorical in a way.
Well, I think that was just maybe how stage blood looked, because he wasn't the only director that had that bright red.
Yeah,
weird looking,
like Technicolor too. Like Deep Red is so saturated and vibrant, But even, I mean, not just the blood. Like Suspiria, so much of Suspiria's why Suspiria is so fun to watch is because of these set pieces and the lighting, and the it feels like you're at a fun house of sorts. So like a haunted house. He's awesome for that reason, which is why I always want folks to watch Suspiria. So
Inferno,
I think,
too, right? Ooh.
Yeah, well, Inferno. But I think a lot of the violence now kind of looks a little dated. It's sort of like, this is obviously violent, but it's also obviously fake. And like the bright red blood, maybe that's to show that it's sort of dreamlike. But I think it looks dated now in retrospect, but at the time, I think that stuff was really terrifying. Like my dad said when he was a kid, there's an Italian series of films called Mondo Cane, which is Dog's World.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like the original Faces of Death. And he said he remembers very vividly seeing a trailer for that, and these people were eating this body at a festival. There's a dude and everyone was eating his body, and my dad was terrified because he was like maybe 10. His parents were like, it's candy, don't worry about it. He's like, my parents are just saying that shit. In like 2003, we found the VHS tapes, and we got Mondo Cane, and then we like watched all of it until we found that, and they were eating a cake.
Yep.
But like it looked like if you look at 80s special effects that like looked awesome back in the 80s, you look at it now, you're like, oh my God, what is that? Harryhausen doing stop motion claymation? That's terrible. But at the time, there was nothing better in cinema. So I think some of that stuff was actually a little bit more impactful at the time, just because it didn't look as bad, because we just didn't have the technology to have better films. So seeing that bright red blood, squirt out of somebody, people are like, like Romero films use that same stage blood, and that scared people at the time. And now it looks kind of quaint.
Yeah, we talked a lot in that class about just the effect that cinema can have on your body, like the images and the sounds, and how that can physically impair you. And there's always those classic stories about people going into The Exorcist and fainting and throwing up and whatnot and feeling queasy. And for the longest time, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, these movies look super cheesy, and people during the time may have felt that way. But I mean, even when I go to see a well-made horror film, a well-made thriller, I have those same sort of experiences where films don't just impact your thoughts and your minds, but can also give you a physical reaction, which is kind of like the phenomena of film. So the last time I had that was watching, I guess I was watching certain scenes in the new Suspiria remake, but also watching Hereditary. I remember very vividly just like losing my appetite, having a hard time like breathing, feeling like I was on the verge of a panic attack. So
that movie's a son of a bitch, man. That dancing scene, woo!
Yeah, right. Effective. And it's so effective when you're in when you're in a theater full of other people that you're kind of like you're trapped in there with them, and you're kind of at the will to their reactions too. Like I was worried during that scene that other people around me would be throwing up or like passing out, which sort of adds to that tension of really immersing yourself into the experience. So you're right, Jason, like no doubts that we view it differently. We have to view it differently because our conventions are super different now. And there was probably an element of him, which is why he wanted to, he used that gag from the Kubrick film to like, he entertains the idea of placing like razors above someone's eyelids so that they would be forced to watch what he wants to show you. It goes back to him like wanting to make something that is so visually striking that it pushes the boundaries of what is allowed, so that we can, reflect on what is allowed to be shown. So you're right. I bet he was going for those visceral reactions in these like over the top, blown out, saturated scenes.
And it's kind of funny that like it's the reverse of what's happening with like him being called sexist and problematic, like to an increasing degree as time goes on. Like the impact of the horrifying scenes in the movies are lessened as time goes on, just because culturally, we have better graphic representations of violence in our like what is possible from an effect standpoint, and B, like I think we're just a little bit numb to like violence to an extent too.
Yeah, it almost becomes comical, some of these scenes,
oh God, in Trauma, when like the head was spinning around saying Nicholas, I laughed.
Yeah,
but that was supposed to be scary.
Or when she falls in the barbed wire pit for
Jesus, that was okay. No, that still got me.
Yeah. Certain things.
People in 2090 are going to see that barbed wire scene and go, like I felt uncomfortable. And he loves that, and I love that. It's not jump scares. He has a good quote about the difference between horror and terror, actually, because we talk about the difference between horror and terror, because like terror is like, something's in my face, but horror is sort of like the apprehension or like the aftershock. You just like hugging your knees in an ambulance with a blanket over you. He said, horror by definition is the emotion of pure revulsion. Terror is the same standard as that of fearful anticipation.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I like that a lot.
He lets his horror scenes breathe too. Like that barbed wire scene goes on for an uncomfortable amount of time. She
knows the guy's waiting for her. Oh, yeah.
She just can't get out. And every time she's like almost out, she falls back, and you're like, oh my God. Like it just seemed like that was actually happening, and she just couldn't.
Yeah, you're like, wow, the safety standards are terrible in this film. Like the guy in Deep Red scaling the wall, and just like the pieces of the wall are falling off, and the guy's like does he have a net at least? I hope.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a million children, so I go to those like jump places with the big ball pits. I'm never fucking going in one of those jump pits again.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna think of the barbed wire scene. I'm just gonna like be in there having a panic attack and die because I'm freaking out and no one else knows.
Yeah.
The other major thing that fuels an Argento film, and that is the score, mostly done by Goblin or the Goblins. However,
it's been both.
You're right.
They've been credited as both.
Both are correct, but just as much as his scene selections and like we stated with the colors, oversaturation, and all that, the music being a backbone and very unconventional, beat times and all that are just as important, especially in something like Suspiria.
Yeah, Goblin, the harmony with Goblin, the marriage with Goblin for Suspiria and Blood Red really take the art house film and turn it into something iconic and memorable, partially because these melodies are so repetitive. And especially if you watch Suspiria just from a sound design standpoint, like he uses that score so much, almost obnoxiously so. And that's another element to what that, when I show my friends Suspiria, they can't get around. It's like, oh, fuck, we're going to listen to this song again. The dun, 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 dun. Yeah. And yeah, it goes in circles and it's so creepy and weird. And it's, again, talking about film conventions, like that's something that doesn't fly anymore in Hollywood cinema in any regard. So it did. It adds.
He did influence American film, like Romero's Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah,
that theme from the mall that like Robot Chicken used because it's so iconic.
I mean, John Carpenter with the Halloween theme, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, the Halloween thing too. No, you're right. I think. Yeah, the goblin thing is what I remember most from watching these films over and over again. Like I can't imagine that film without it. And it's beautiful. It's rad. I don't know. That just adds to the horror aesthetic part of it. That even those repeating melodies can make you feel trapped, can make you feel like stuck in this haunted house, and they're kind of uncomfortable to listen to over and over and over again. So.
He even used it as a subtle storytelling device in that, because when she's walking through, Susie Banion's walking through with the weird kid over there, and it's like which, it's telling you things. If you'll be rewarded if you kind of pay attention to it, and it kind of tells you where I said before, where his jump scares, although they're not jump scares, but I guess his scares, so to speak, like the end of Deep Red with the dummy coming out. Those he uses music as kind of a tell to that as well, because the shots are so unconventional that he uses that repeating score to kind of drive the narrative as well.
Yeah.
What's funny, he didn't just use Italians either. He used a British dude named Keith Emerson on Inferno, and Emerson was fantastic because he was like using a weird time signature on like I think it was like a Verdi piece. He did a theme on it, but he put it in like 11/8 or some weird time signature, something really weird, and it just gave this real frenetic feel, like being in Italian traffic. So like even the people that weren't necessarily like Italian that were doing the scores on his films, like kind of put that Italian stank on it, and I think that was really effective. Like Emerson's Taxi Ride theme is I think the one I'm thinking of. You can probably find the Inferno soundtrack online and just listen to what I'm talking about.
Dario would say, you've got to use this piece of Verdi. I said, well, if I'm going to do a version of this Verdi piece, I'm going to do it my way. So I actually did it in 5/4. And if you've ever been in an Italian taxi and been bumped around, 5/4 is a very suitable time signature.
Or, I don't know, watch the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I like the slow progression of, like you said at the beginning, where it was mostly those black glove killer giallo, more traditional giallos, and then he had that real strong influence of Edgar Allan Poe, where he went to more of the fantastical. Once he gets, like I said, Phenomena, you have a young pre-Labyrinth Jennifer Connelly as this, this very beautiful kind of wealthy heiress, kind of thrown into this very bizarre situation where you know, it's just like, oh, is this kind of like this is very traditional, because it still has that element of the young girl to be getting kind of running away or getting lost from the rest of the bus tour or whatever, and then you have that initial murder with the glass and the decapitation. He loves decapitating people with glass.
Yeah,
it's a recurring theme for sure. But then out of nowhere, you have this, you know, she has this weird power, and it's not like it's so much where, you know, with the whole bug, you know, she could control bugs, or bugs are, you know, like her or whatever. But it's not so overt where it becomes like a superhero film. It's just like, oh, it's all about this girl that can control bugs, because a lot of the times she's in some like literal deep shit, literal pool of cadavers, and she can't get out of it. Like, no bugs are gonna, you know, help her out of it. It's not like, you know, the bog of eternal stench where Ludo could howl and the rocks come out of the shit water. It's literally, she, you know, it's a useful thing sometimes, that she could do. And I like that he made some of his films fantastical, but they weren't so overtly fantastical where it lessened the peril. At any point, Jennifer Connelly, her character in Phenomena, could have been killed very easily by literally someone just walking up and stabbing her. But there were certain times where he puts this otherworldly things, and it just marriages so well with the traditional slasher film.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of funny. There's a little bit of autobiography to it too. A good quote from him is, "Every writer to some extent writes about himself." And it's funny you brought up Phenomena, because that story that Jennifer Connelly tells early in the movie about her mother, like forgetting about her, that happened to Dario Argento, which may explain some of the, you know, some of the feelings he has about women, or just like how he turned out a little weird.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting thing about Phenomena too, that is his favorite film that he's made. Suspiria is one of his least favorite films, ironically, because that is kind of the most beloved of his films. But he even says, I don't know why people like that so much. You know, Phenomena was great. Deep Red, he has great affection for. But yeah, as far as his opera too, even though he hated working with Christina Marlish, he said that was the worst experience he ever had. She complained about literally everything, but I'm like, you did put pins on her eyes, so
Yeah.
He doesn't hate the 5 days, but that movie was so bad that he had to start making Giallo movies again, because like originally he thought like The Cat of Nine Tails, he was just going to do a trilogy of Giallo movies and then like move on. But the 5 days was so bad, he was like, all right, I guess I'll make Deep Red. And good thing for him, he did.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
There's definitely a steep decline. I mean, there a lot of filmmakers, even like someone like John Carpenter, and I bring him up a lot because they're not just close friends, but their careers kind of mirror each other as well. Where Carpenter's, I think, decline was a little bit more subtle in the 90s. You know, we got to, you know, The Invisible Man or whatever, and it was just the worst. But Memoirs of an Invisible Man. But then you get Argento, and I think it was Right to Trauma, and everything after that, it's hard to really find anything enjoyable. I don't know if he still seems as passionate about it. If you hear interviews with the actors, I mean, especially if they're his daughter, he's still passionate about it. He's still jumping up on couches when things kind of strike him. They'll build apparatuses and things to get different views and different ways to put a mise en scène, where I guess the shot composition is still there and he's still talented, but it's just, I mean, Dracula 3D, Jesus H, right?
Oh, it was so bad. Giallo was bad.
I know,
with
I wanna
Adrian
watch
Brody,
it.
Mother of Tears. He reunited with his ex-wife for Mother of Tears just to finish up a trilogy and just make a piece of crap. Like, why bother?
Yeah. Which the one with Adrian Brody, is that?
That was Giallo.
Yeah, Giallo.
Yeah, I mean, there is a scene in Mother of Tears or whatever where, you know, he throws a baby doll down into the drink. I guess that's shocking, but it just looks terrible. I mean, it was just, yeah, I don't know. He's 78 years old, so I mean, I mean, I don't know, Sam, you might follow him a little bit more as far as what he's doing now. Is he still making films? Planning on making films?
He's got something in the tank.
Yeah, I don't know much about what he's doing now. He's, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of these later films. I'm curious just because I like him so much. But, you know, even if they aren't enjoyable, I'm at this point where I've watched so many freaking films for school that I don't watch them for enjoyment anymore. You know, you watch them for a ton of other different things. So I need to do some homework on what he's doing now. But like, it's always hard for an artist to keep its momentum, or their films to be good, or their music to be good after a certain amount of years. You know, he is old. You know, you can't blame him for that. So you just try to understand in totality that he wants to make art, and maybe in 30 years these films age better than we're giving them credit. You know, like, who knows? Maybe they do a switch, you know, a 180, and become kind of those novelty pieces that we like now that everyone hated back in the day. So,
like Them from the 50s,
right? Yeah,
I know Them. Yeah.
I want you to keep thinking that way, Sam. So don't watch Dracula 3D. Yeah.
It's called Dracula 3D. Like, if you watch a movie called Dracula 3D, it's your fault. Like, ooh, Rutger Hauer, he's great and everything.
Yeah,
I'm not shitting. I like Rutger Hauer.
Yeah, I was getting Blind Justice was the shit. And you can't
Blind Fury.
Yeah, sure. What's Blind Justice?
I don't know. Sounds like a Steven Seagal movie more than a.
That was the knockoff version or something.
You can take that to the bank, Senator Trask. The blood bank. Yeah. Blind Fury. That was his Zatoichi movie, the Americanized. Was it?
No. But it was fun.
But it was fun.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I like when he worked with Romero. I like when he worked with Savini. So like, I'm a little more familiar with like the latter half of his filmography, whereas Sam's more familiar with the first half. And he made a lot of schlocky movies, and they're a lot of fun to watch. Like, really, just watch Trauma. I don't want to tell you too much, but it's a lot of fun, and it's just like, it's a piece of crap, but like, I really liked it. It's not like a Room piece of crap that I liked. It's more like a, I don't know, like a Return of the Living Dead piece of crap that I liked.
Like 13 Ghosts or what?
Ooh,
yeah, kind of like that. Ghosts. Two Evil Eyes. That was something we're talking about, because that was like his collaboration with Romero, and you kind of saw both of their films kind of diverge from that point, and they really influenced each other a lot. I'm surprised they didn't collaborate earlier than 1990, honestly.
Yeah, seriously.
They hung out. They were good buddies, but then he just called him. Romero said he just called him. He's like, hey, I want to make a movie, and he's like, come on over. And like 2 days later,
you don't have to do the accent, man.
He's offended everyone.
I'm a Dario Argento. I'm a Giorgio Romero. Oh my god. Seriously?
Nah, George Romero.
Like
more,
it is.
Yeah.
It's very offensive.
I flew down to Dario Argento's place. I'm George Romero. Yeah. It was pretty good. Man, it was such a good. Those are so much fun because they just felt like Tales of the Crypt a little bit, but just done really well.
Like Creep Show. Did you see Creep Show?
Yeah, absolutely. And Harvey, like Tom, this is like in the beginning of the Tom Savini era, and there's a point where something happens to in like a dream sequence, something happens to Harvey Keitel's character, and you get this like spike coming out of his mouth, and Harvey Keitel made them sign, or he got their lawyers to make the filmmaker and Tom Savini sign something where Harvey Keitel's like, that
he never had to see the fake head.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to see my fake head with the spike coming out. And they're like, why? He's like, I just can't. And so they all had to sign something.
It was such a creepy, realistic looking fake head. He's like, I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, he put his actors through the literal ringer, even someone that he cared about, like Jennifer Connelly. He had great, Argento had great affection working with her even at a young age. But he would put his actors into situations where there was one point at the end where it was kind of the loving scene where she's sitting with the chimp, and the chimp, he's just like, can you move the chimp's face a little bit? And she's just like, oh, okay, whatever. And so she kept doing it to the point where the chimp got irritated and bit half of her finger off. She had to be rushed to the hospital and they had to reattach it. Luckily, it was in time. But I mean, awesome. he was just sacrificing for the greater art and for the greater good. And even Jennifer Connelly's like, yeah, it was a great experience.
Was later when he calmed down. Imagine Jessica Harper. He's like, hey, today for 14 hours, I'm going to dump a maggots on your head. You got me doing the voice. That's
Yeah, exactly. Hey, it's okay. It's George Romero. I'm back to tell you about. No. Yeah.
Hey, it's Christopher Walken here for no reason.
He is. Yes, he is.
I heard we were doing voices.
Hey, it's John C. Reilly. I'm back from the last episode.
Remember me from the last episode? Did we just become best friends?
Oh, yeah. This podcast
He always
really
sounds like a
good.
Muppet when you do it. I love your John C. Reilly.
Yeah,
Waka waka waka.
It's
Yeah,
like
man.
if a 5-year-old did it, I'd play Wreck-It Ralph. Yeah. I don't know.
So yeah, Jessica Harper really just got tortured for that movie, and well,
She loved every minute of it, though. She didn't complain at all.
did she? Would you like maggots in your hair all day? I don't know if I would.
Look what Jennifer Connelly had to constantly be playing with bugs and maggots.
Yeah,
and...
she didn't get bit by a maggot. A
bit by a
maggot didn't
chimp.
bite her finger off, so like points for Connolly, I guess.
Yeah. I like an early quote from Connelly where she's just like, acting isn't something that I tried to do. It's just something that one day I was doing. And I just realized, and then half of my life was gone. And I just
She's
realized I was
admitting
doing
that
this
it's
thing.
really easy. I'm glad.
Oh,
Oh,
God.
thanks.
You get your fucking finger bit off by a chimp and still show up to work.
For $25 million or whatever she makes for a movie
For
now,
Phenomena,
fine.
I doubt she made like $5 for Phenomena.
Yeah, well, she made $5 for Phenomena, got her finger bitten off, so she could be in Labyrinth. So
She got to
could-
keep the chimp.
Getting bit by a chimp's probably better than going ass to ass on a giant dildo, anyway. So.
Oh. And join us next week for our Darren Aronofsky episode. Yeah.
We'll be joined by Jennifer Connelly's lawyers to make sure we don't talk about her again.
Any closing thoughts on Dario Argento, Jason?
As a closing thought, I wish we'd heard from our guest more, and that was our fault. Do you have any closing thoughts, Sam?
As a closing thought, I think Argento's the shit, man. I like his earlier stuff. I think he's fun. If you go in with the right mindset, I think you'll have a blast with him. If you like any sort of art house horror or even just entertaining horror films, check him out.
Yeah, if you like people being killed by going through a pane of glass, well, we have a treat for you. That happens 97 times.
at the very least. He's actually, being in Italian studies, there's very few things that I feel like I can take over. I'm always trying to cross the bridge and bring stuff over to an American audience or like an American, just my American friends. And Argento is always one of those things that is very approachable. His work is very approachable, even outside of Italian studies. So, and works like Italo Calvino, who I study, who's an author. I'm always trying, to get my friends to read Calvino. He's definitely marketable to a non-European audience, I should say. So yeah, I think I'd love for more folks to watch Deep Red in general.
I think that's everyone says Suspiria, but I thought I liked Deep Red better. Did you?
Am I the only weirdo that liked Phenomena the best?
You just like Jennifer Connelly, and that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable.
Seriously.
No, but it felt like it just felt like a lot of fun, and that's one of the films that people shit on the most of his. They thought it was just they didn't like it. It was not a well liked film. But I mean, Charles Pleasance and Jennifer Connelly and chimps. I mean, it was just a
insects.
Yeah. I love the effect of when she initially does the calling of the insect, so to speak, when she's getting bullied in school. The effect was done by pouring coffee grounds in water, and then they just superimpose that over the night sky and over the school, so it looks like like a locust swarm. He really cared. I mean, he really cared about every single ounce of visual magistry, so to speak, of his films. There's not an ounce of fat on it if you just want to watch an Argento film for just the experience. They're moving paintings. Pessimists or the critic can be like, oh, the blood looks orange, but it's not about that. Like I said earlier, it's the blood and the gore and everything is almost more metaphorical. We're going to be talking about Argento for generations to come, and that is something that is extremely rare and extremely special. So talk about extremely rare and extremely special. I just really want to thank again Sam Gallio for joining us on this episode of Director's Cut. Where can everyone find you, Sam?
My pleasure, man. I love talking to you guys. I'm at Rhystic Studies on Twitter mostly, and if you like magic videos, that's where I am on YouTube as well. And that's basically it for me in terms of social media. But yeah, it's a pleasure. Super pleasure. I'm very stoked to talk to you guys.
Awesome. Mr. Jason E. Alt, where can everyone find you when you're not doing this?
Ironically enough, at Jason E. Alt on Twitter. That's got information about all the other stuff I do around the magic community and elsewhere. It's a pleasure to be talking about Not Magic today. It's a great episode. Thanks to Sam for coming on, and thanks to John for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks to our viewers for tuning in.
Yes, or listening on the podcast sites. You could find us everywhere that you consume podcasts, as well as watching this video episode. You could also directly support the show on patreon.com. Everything goes back into the channel to continue to upgrade and just make all the shows better in one way or another, whether that be visually, audibly, or anything else. You can find me directly on Twitter at OrzovDone. Chat with me about movies, magic, cartoons, anything and everything. I'm very accessible. So until next time, we'll see you all at the movies. Ciao.
Ciao.
About basically what that's all about.
Yeah,
well, that was just a great way to throw it to you. Can you talk about
great, man.
The magic
what do you
of
think
editing.
about that?
Think
like
about
Chris Farley on
mansplaining. Yeah.
Like that Chris Farley on S. Do you remember when you wrote "Let It Be"? That was awesome. All right, Sam. I could be clumsier if I worked at it, but just
That might.